Grand Admiral Zixnorp of the Galactic Confederation stared at the holographic display, his four eyes blinking in rapid succession. The pulsating red dot representing the human fleet was, well, it was doing something utterly incomprehensible. Again. "Yeah, what in the name of the 7 moons are they doing now?" he muttered, mandibles clicking in agitation. His aide-de-camp, Lieutenant Quibble, suppressed a nervous titter. "It appears, sir," Quibble began, his voice wavering like a quantum string, "that the humans are, laughs nervously. They're using their ships to spell out words in space." Zixnorp's eye stalks swiveled towards Quibble, radiating disbelief. "They're... what?" "Spelling words, sir. In Galactic Standard, no less. It says..." Quibble squinted at the display. "Your mama's so fat, she has her own orbit. And there's a crude drawing of what I believe is supposed to be your mother, sir." The Grand Admiral's face, tentacles curled in on themselves, a sure sign of extreme confusion in his species. "Lieutenant, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't we in the middle of a war?" Quibble nodded, his head bobbing like a zero-gravity yo-yo. "Yes, sir. A rather serious one at that. And the humans, instead of, I don't know, fighting, are using their warships to insult my mother." "It would appear so, sir. Although," Quibble added helpfully, "I'm sure they don't mean any real offence to your esteemed matriarch. It's probably just a tactical, thing." Zixnorp resisted the urge to slam his face tentacles into the nearest hard surface. He'd been doing that a lot lately, and the medics were starting to ask questions. Tactical, right, because nothing says military genius like cosmic graffiti. Just then, General Blurg, commander of the ground forces, burst into the war room. His gelatinous form was quivering with excitement, causing small ripples in the floor where he stood. "Admiral, Admiral," Blurg gurgled, his speech bubbles forming faster than a supernova. "You won't believe what the humans are doing planet-side." Zixnorp sighed, a sound like air escaping from a punctured gas giant. "Let me guess, General. They're using our troops to form a conga line?" Blurg's eyes, all 17 of them, blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" This time, Zixnorp did slam his face tentacles into the console. The resulting thunk echoed through the war room like the death knell of his sanity. "Sir?" Quibble ventured cautiously. "Perhaps we should review the humans' previous, tactics? It might help us understand their current strategy." Zixnorp lifted his head, leaving a small dent in the shape of his face on the console. "Fine," he grumbled. "But I swear by the cosmic egg, if I hear one more thing about their hold-my-beer maneuvers, I'm resigning and opening a Calzot milk bar on Betelgeuse 9. Quibble tapped a few commands into his datapad, and a holographic timeline appeared in the center of the war room. It sparkled and shimmered, much like the remnants of Zixnorp's patience. "Let's start at the beginning," Quibble suggested, his voice taking on the tone of a kindergarten teacher explaining why eating glue is bad. "The first major engagement was at the Battle of Proxima Centauri." The hologram shifted to show 2 fleets facing each other. The Confederation's ships were arrayed in perfect formation, a testament to Milhousan's of years of martial tradition. The human ships, in contrast, looked like they had been arranged by a drunken space octopus with a grudge against geometry. "As you recall, sir," Quibble continued, "we were confident in our superior numbers and technology. Our battle computers predicted a 99.9% chance of victory." Zixnorp nodded, his eye stalks drooping at the memory. "And then they did. That thing." Quibble nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. That thing." In the hologram, the human ships suddenly scattered in all directions, as if someone had kicked a cosmic ant-hill, Then, inexplicably, they began to spin. "They called it the whirling dervish maneuver," Blurg interjected, his gelatinous form jiggling with barely suppressed mirth. "Apparently it was inspired by an ancient earth dance." Zixnorp watched in renewed disbelief as the spinning human ships wove through the Confederation fleet, causing mass confusion and several spectacular collisions. But how did they aim their weapons while spinning like that? Quibble coughed delicately. "They, didn't, sir. They just fired in all directions and hoped for the best." "Hoped for the—" "They turned intergalactic warfare into a game of cosmic pinball," Zixnorp exploded, his face tentacles flailing wildly. "And it worked! How in the name of the void did it work?" Blurg shrugged, an impressive feat for a being without shoulders. "The humans have a saying, sir. If it's stupid but it works, it isn't stupid." Zixnorp glared at him. "I'm beginning to think that's their entire military doctrine." Quibble hastily moved the timeline forward. "Perhaps we should move on to the siege of Alpha Centauri, sir." The hologram shifted again, showing a heavily fortified Confederation base on a rocky, inhospitable planet. A small fleet of human ships hovered in orbit. "Ah, yes," Zixnorp said, a hint of satisfaction creeping into his voice. "This is where we had them. Our base was impregnable, our defenses unbreakable. Even those madhouse humans couldn't possibly—" He trailed off as the hologram played out the events. The human ships, instead of attacking, began beaming down objects. Thousands upon thousands of small, fuzzy objects. "What are those?" Zixnorp asked, squinting at the hologram. Quibble consulted his notes. "According to our intelligence, sir, they're called tribbles."
Tribbles.
"Yes, sir. Small, furry creatures that reproduce at an alarming rate. Apparently, the humans got the idea from an ancient entertainment program." Zixnorp watched in horrified fascination as the tribbles multiplied, quickly overwhelming the base. Confederation soldiers could be seen fleeing in panic, pursued by waves of purring fluff. "They conquered one of our strongest fortresses. With weaponized fuzzballs." Zixnorp's voice had risen to a pitch usually reserved for calling space dogs. Blurg nodded enthusiastically, sending ripples through his gelatinous form. "Oh, yes. And do you know what they called this tactic? The trouble with tribbles gambit." Zixnorp closed all four of his eyes, took a deep breath, and seriously considered whether it was too late to evolve into a non-sentient species. "Moving on," he ground out through clenched mandibles. Quibble, sensing his superior's mounting frustration, quickly advanced the timeline. "Perhaps we should discuss the Battle of Betelgeuse, sir. Surely that will, He trailed off as the hologram displayed the events of that infamous encounter. Zixnorp watched with a growing sense of despair as the human fleet, vastly outnumbered, adopted a formation that could only be described as— Are they forming a giant hand?" he asked incredulously. Quibble nodded, his antennae drooping. "Yes, sir. Specifically, a hand making a rather rude gesture." As they watched, the human ships, arranged in the shape of a cosmic middle finger, charged straight at the heart of the Confederation fleet. "But that's suicidal," Zixnorp exclaimed. "There's no tactical advantage to— "Flipping the bird, sir," Quibble supplied helpfully. "I believe that's what they call it. Whatever it's called, it's insane. They'll be annihilated." But as the hologram played out, the sheer audacity of the human maneuver seemed to paralyze the Confederation forces. Ships scattered in confusion. Commanders argued over comms about whether this was some kind of elaborate trick. And, In the ensuing chaos, the humans somehow managed to punch through the fleet's center. "They broke through," Zixnorp said numbly. With a giant space hand gesture, they broke through our lines. Blurg, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly burbled with laughter. "Oh, but sir, you haven't heard the best part. Do you know what they named this tactic?" Zixnorp turned all four eyes on the general, a sense of dread washing over him. "I'm afraid to ask, but go on." "The Up Yours Gambit, sir," Blurg announced, practically vibrating with glee. For a long moment, silence reigned in the war room. Then, slowly, deliberately, Zixnorp turned to face the wall and began gently banging his head against it. Quibble and Blurg exchanged worried glances. Well, Quibble looked worried. Blurg, being a gelatinous blob, mostly just looked blobby. "Sir?" Quibble ventured cautiously. "Perhaps we should take a break. I could get you some nice calming juxtaberry juice?" Zixnorp stopped his rhythmic head-banging and turned back to his subordinates. His eye stalks were slightly bent, giving him a somewhat deranged appearance. "No, no," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "Let's continue. I want to see how much deeper this Krotnag hole goes." Quibble gulped audibly but obediently advanced the timeline. The hologram shifted to show a massive space station, the pride of Confederation engineering. "Ah, the defense of Station Omega," Zixnorp said, a hint of his old confidence returning. "Surely even the humans couldn't find a way to make a mockery of this battle." Blurg and Quibble exchanged glances again, this time with the air of two beings who knew they were about to witness a spectacular meltdown. As they watched, the human fleet approached the station. But instead of attacking, they began to dance? Ships weaved in and out in complex patterns, forming shapes and sequences that seemed to have no rhyme or reason. What are they doing?" Zixnorp asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Quibble consulted his notes, his antennae twitching nervously. "According to our intelligence, sir, this is something called the Macarena." "The Maca what now?" "An ancient earth dance, apparently. Very popular at social gatherings." Zixnorp watched, slack-mandibuled, as the human ships continued their cosmic choreography. But how is this a battle tactic? As if in answer to his question, alarms began blaring from the holographic station. Confederation ships, drawn in by curiosity or sheer bewilderment, had begun to mimic the humans' movements. They're joining in?" Zixnorp's voice had risen to a pitch usually reserved for helium-breathing species. "In the middle of a battle?" Blurg, who had been suspiciously quiet, suddenly burst out, "Oh, but sir, you haven't heard the best part. The humans were broadcasting music to go along with the dance. Our ship's crews couldn't resist." The Grand Admiral turned slowly to face the General, his eye stalks quivering with barely suppressed emotion. "Are you telling me," he said, each word carefully enunciated, "that we lost one of our most important strategic assets? Because our forces were too busy dancing?" Quibble, ever helpful, chimed in. "The humans called it Operation Dance Dance Revolution, sir." There was a moment of profound silence in the war room, broken only by the soft plop of Zixnorp's face tentacles hitting the floor as they went completely limp. "Right," the Grand Admiral said after a long moment. "I think I need that juxtaberry juice now. Make it a double. No, a triple. Actually, just bring me the whole damn jug." As Quibble scurried off to fetch the juice, Blurg oozed closer to Zixnorp, his gelatinous form quivering with what might have been excitement or indigestion. "But, sir, we haven't even gotten to their most brilliant maneuver yet." Zixnorp eyed the General warily. Do I even want to know? Oh, you must hear this, sir. It's simply, well, it's pure genius, in a completely insane, utterly human way. The Grand Admiral sighed, a sound like air escaping from a punctured battlecruiser. Fine. Hit me with it. It's not like my faith in the natural order of the universe can be shaken any further. Blurg's entire form rippled with glee as he began his tale. Well, sir, it happened during the Battle of Rigel 4. We had them outnumbered, outgunned, and backed into an asteroid field. Victory was assured. Let me guess, Zixnorp interrupted dryly. They pulled some ridiculous stunt that defied all logic and reason and somehow snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. Oh, no, sir. It's much better than that, Blurg burbled enthusiastically. You see, just as our forces were closing in for the kill, the humans did something unexpected. You don't say, Zixnorp muttered. They started broadcasting on all frequencies, but it wasn't a surrender message or a plea for mercy. No, it was... Well, perhaps it's better if I show you. Blurg oozed over to the holographic display, and with a gelatinous appendage that might charitably be called a finger, activated a recording. Suddenly the war room was filled with sound, a rhythmic beat, overlaid with a male human voice singing, "Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down." Zixnorp's eye stalks twisted in confusion. What in the name of the cosmic egg is this? It's called music, sir, Quibble supplied helpfully, returning with a jug of juxtaberry juice. The humans are quite fond of it. I know what music is, Lieutenant, Zixnorp snapped. But why were they broadcasting this banger, Blurg supplied. At Zixnorp's bewildered look, he added, That's what the humans call a particularly good song, sir. I've been studying their culture. Zixnorp made a mental note to have Blurg's recreational time severely restricted. Fine. But why were they broadcasting this banger in the middle of a battle? Blurg's form wobbled with what might have been barely suppressed laughter. Well, sir, that's the brilliant part. You see, this particular song is part of an ancient human tradition called rickrolling. Rickrolling, Zixnorp repeated flatly. Yes, sir. It's a form of prank where you trick someone into listening to this song. And, well, it worked. It worked. Zixnorp felt a headache forming in all three of his brains. How exactly did broadcasting an annoying song work as a battle tactic? Blurg's gelatinous form quivered with what might have been excitement or the early stages of mitosis. Well, sir, you have to understand the psychological impact. Our forces were confused, distracted. Some even found the song catchy. Zixnorp stared at Blurg, all four of his eyes wide with disbelief. Catchy, he repeated, the word sounding foreign and slightly obscene in his mouth. Oh, yes, sir, Blurg burbled enthusiastically. Reports indicate that several ship captains were seen. How did the intelligence report put it? Ah, yes, bopping their head appendages to the beat. The Grand Admiral closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and seriously considered the merits of a career change. Perhaps Deep Space Hermit had some openings. So, let me get this straight. Our forces, the pride of the Confederation military, were defeated because they were too busy bopping to a human song. Quibble, ever helpful, chimed in. Not just defeated, sir. Absolutely routed. The humans used the confusion to execute a series of maneuvers that our tactical computers are still trying to understand. They're calling it the Great Rickroll Offensive. Zixnorp slowly lowered himself into his command chair, his tentacles drooping like overcooked noodles. The Great Rickroll Offensive, he repeated, each word dripping with a mixture of disbelief and resignation. Of course they are. Just then, a series of urgent beeps emanated from the main console. Quibble rushed over, his antennae twitching nervously as he read the incoming message. "Sir?" he exclaimed, his voice rising to a pitch usually reserved for helium-breathing species. "We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." Zixnorp's eye stalks swiveled towards the lieutenant, a sense of dread washing over him. "Let me guess. More music?" Quibble shook his head, sending his antennae into a frenzy. "No, sir. It's a message, text only." "Well?" Zixnorp demanded, his patience wearing thinner than a neutron star's event horizon. "What does it say?" Quibble cleared his throat, or whatever passed for a throat in his species, and read aloud. "Roses are red, violets are blue. We're about to attack, so here's a haiku. Deathworlders, approach. Your tactics, old and stuffy. Prepare to get wrecked." For a long moment silence reigned in the war room. Then, slowly, deliberately, Zixnorp reached for the jug of juxtaberry juice and took a long, deep swig directly from the container. "Sir?" Blurg ventured cautiously, his gelatinous form rippling with concern. "What are your orders?" Zixnorp lowered the jug, a purple stain spreading across his face tentacles. "Orders? You want orders? Fine. Here are my orders. First, someone explain to me what wrecked means. Second, I want every scrap of information we have on human poetry. And third," he paused, his eye stalks swiveling to take in the bewildered faces of his subordinates, "someone teach me how to bop." Quibble and Blurg exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of confusion and alarm. Well, Quibble looked confused and alarmed. Blurg, being a gelatinous blob, mostly just looked blobby. "Sir?" Quibble ventured hesitantly. "Are you feeling all right?" Zixnorp's laugh was not entirely sane. "All right? Oh, I'm just peachy, Lieutenant. I'm commanding a war against an enemy that conquers fortresses with fuzzballs, breaks through our lines with rude hand gestures, and defeats our fleets with catchy tunes. And now they're attacking us with bad poetry. So yes, I'm absolutely fantastic." He stood up abruptly, swaying slightly from the effects of the juxtaberry juice. "Don't you see? We've been going about this all wrong. Logic, strategy, military doctrine, it's all useless against these Deathworlders." Blurg oozed forward, his form undulating with what might have been excitement or indigestion. "What are you saying, sir?" "I'm saying," Zixnorp declared, his eye stalks quivering with manic energy, "that if we want to beat the humans, we need to start thinking like them. No more perfectly arranged fleet formations. No more carefully calculated battle plans. From now on, we're going to be unpredictable, illogical, and absolutely insane." Quibble's antennae drooped in dismay. "But sir, that goes against everything we've been taught. The sacred texts of warfare, passed down through Milhausens of generations, are about as useful as a chocolate teapot against the humans," Zixnorp interrupted. "No, if we want to win this war, we need to embrace chaos. We need to be random, unpredictable, and utterly bonkers." He whirled around, facing the holographic display of the approaching human fleet. "Quibble, I want you to compose a limerick about the human admiral's questionable parentage. Make it as offensive as possible." A limerick, sir?" Quibble stuttered, his antennae tying themselves in knots. "Yes, a limerick. And make it snappy. Blurg." The gelatinous general quivered to attention. "Yes, sir." "I want you to reconfigure our fleet into the shape of what's that earth animal? The one with the long neck and spots." "A giraffe, sir?" "Yes, that's the one. I want our fleet in the shape of a giraffe, and I want it done 5 minutes ago." As his subordinate scrambled to carry out his increasingly bizarre orders, Zixnorp turned back to the holographic display, a manic grin spreading across his face tentacles. "You want to play games, humans? Fine, let's play. But Remember, you're not the only ones who can be unpredictable. Just then, another series of urgent beeps emanated from the console. Quibble, who had been struggling to rhyme Admiral with bad spiral, looked up in alarm. "Sir, the humans are... they're..." "Out with it, Lieutenant," Zixnorp snapped. "What are they doing now?" Quibble's voice was barely above a whisper. "They're challenging us to a dance-off, sir." For a moment Zixnorp stood perfectly still, his eye stalks rigid with shock. Then slowly a look of determination spread across his features. "Well then," he said, reaching for a datapad. "Someone find me the coordinates of the nearest space disco. And get me a pair of platform shoes. If it's a dance-off they want, it's a dance-off they'll get." As his subordinates stared at him in stunned silence, Zixnorp began to practice what he hoped was a passable moonwalk. The fate of the Galactic Confederation, it seemed, now rested on his ability to bust a move. Somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the human fleet watched in a mixture of amusement and disbelief as the Confederation ships began to rearrange themselves into what appeared to be a cosmic conga line. Admiral Jane Mad Dog Martinez of the Earth Defense Force leaned back in her command chair, a smirk playing across her lips. "Well, I'll be damned," she chuckled. "Looks like the aliens are finally learning to loosen up." Her XO, Commander Chen, raised an eyebrow. "Should we be concerned, ma'am? This is unexpected." Martinez's grin widened. "Concerned? Hell no, Chen. This is exactly what we've been waiting for. You see, the moment they start acting like us, that's when we've really won." "How so, Admiral?" She leaned forward, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Because, Commander, no one does batshit crazy quite like humanity. They may have learned to dance, but we've been practicing our whole lives for this moment." As if on cue, the ship's speakers crackled to life, blaring the opening notes of Stayin' Alive by the Bee Gees. Martinez stood up, straightening her uniform. "Now then," she declared, striking a pose John Travolta would have been proud of. "Let's show these aliens how we do it down on Earth. Hit it!" And as the human fleet began its own elaborate space choreography, Admiral Martinez couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this was the strangest and most entertaining way to end a galactic war in the history of the universe. Little did she know, back on the Confederation flagship, Grand Admiral Zixnorp was having similar thoughts as he attempted to master the intricacies of the electric slide. The fate of galaxies, it seemed, now hung in the balance of who had the better moves. And somewhere, in the vast cosmic dance floor of space, the universe itself seemed to pause for a moment, as if to say, "Now this is entertainment."